nightmare well. All of this sets the stage for testimony from BP's president and the heads of 4 other major oil companies this week. Arizona Congressman Republican John Shadegg is a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where that hearing will take place, and was part of the committee that released those documents. Congressman, my first question to you is, having read this document, which details, as Congressman Waxman says, a pattern and practice, it seems, of cutting corners on safety because of time and money, can you draw a direct line between those decisions and the Gulf disaster?
Well, I don't know if I can draw a direct line, but I think what the American people want to know is, was BP the only company doing this? I think that many industry experts knew BP was cutting corners. They knew that BPA was acting in an unsafe manner. Interestingly, BP was promoting itself as the most green energy company in the world. In point of fact, it had a terrible safety record. And I think the other 4 executives in front of us need to come clean and acknowledge that this was a human problem, not a system problem. And I think that raises the question of, does the president's moratorium, based on a report where he altered the results the scientists gave him, go too far? And is that moratorium going to do more damage to consumers across the country?
But Congressman, actually, you bring up the moratorium, but didn't you just make a case for the moratorium to stay in place? I mean it this way.
No,
we found out that BP was negligent.
That's right.
But I think the reason you might need the moratorium. Yeah.
Well, the scientists who wrote the paper, which the Interior Department then changed, said we do not need a moratorium this broad, and they were offended that that report had been changed before it was given to the president. We do not need an overly broad moratorium. We do need to know if this was a human problem caused by BP cutting corners, as Henry Waxman's document suggests, and if so, what's the safety record of the rest of the industry? The important issue here is, we need to know, is the rest of the industry safe or is it not safe? We need to know from them.
You mentioned the human errors, and you're right, that is one way to look at this document.
Not necessarily human errors. It was the human negligence. Mr. Waxman's report.
Correct. Human negligence, whatever you want to call it. Okay, you raised this issue, but isn't the question of whether our regulations allow and permit and foster this kind of human error or human negligence to take place?
Now, I think you ask a great question. Can government prevent this? Did government prevent it in the past? Obviously, the regulatory system we had in place in the past failed, but was that because the regulations weren't written tight enough, or was that because the people at the MMS didn't do their jobs? I think that's a very valid question, and I think we ought to be looking at safety at every one of these other rigs, but I do think that we need to know, was this a system failure, and is offshore drilling inherently unsafe, inherently environmentally too risky to do, or is this BP cutting corners, as I've heard other industry experts say? And I'm saying we should ask those other industry experts, and we got to find out, can this be done safely or not? When an airplane crashes, we need to assure the American people that that was the failure of one airplane pilot or one airplane, not the entire industry. We don't stop flying. We look at what went wrong. That's what we need to do in this example. Was this just BP, or is this industry-wide? Is the moratorium too broad or not broad enough? Those are good questions.
Well, Congressman, doesn't it make sense at this point, regardless of this issue of the moratorium, that at this point every single new oil well, whether deep water or shallow water, should go through a more tougher round of inspection, a new round of inspections, regardless of whether they had complied before?
Absolutely, and indeed the report, as originally written by the scientists, said we should get out there and inspect every well. We should make sure that they're complying with current regulations. Obviously, the existing MMS personnel aren't doing their jobs. I'm all for that. But the report doesn't say stop drilling everywhere in America and then do that report and wait 6 months. It says do that now. There are places where we are still drilling through hard rock, nowhere near the oil. Why are we stopping drilling there? If that's justified, that's fine. But I'd like to know why the report was altered. I'd like to know what we do need to do to make it safe again. And I would like to find out if 6 months was an arbitrary number or if it's appropriate. And what will the price be? The scientists, the 7 scientists who felt that report was, who criticized that report because it was altered after they signed it, said the current moratorium is not going to improve safety. If it's not going to improve safety, then we need to look at that, because we ought to be doing what improves safety, and we ought to also be doing what ensures that we lose the fewest number of jobs. At the end of the day, this has consumer impact that can be very devastating.
All right, Congressman John Shadegg of Arizona, thank you for your perspective.